Okay. I want to give you a little Xen Security weather report. So what was the security team doing last year? By nature, we can't tell in public what we're doing right now, so we have to do it afterwards. So here it comes. We are quite proud at the Xen community about our Xen security process, which is very well documented. It's kind of state-of-the-art in the open source world. You can find the document in the via the Xen wiki, for example, under the given URL. What is stated in there is how the security process is working, how security issues are to be reported, who will be notified, who's working on them, how to negotiate pre-disclosure, if there is any pre-disclosure about any bug or not, and so on. So the discoverer of a security issue will basically control the timeline of the whole process. He or she can give up control to the security team to handle it by the security team, or to be included in the handling of any issue. Another important document is what is security supported, which features are security support in which Xen versions. This is documented in a matrix. The source for each Xen version of that is in the Xen Git tree in the support.md document. Any security issues being discovered should be reported to security@xenproject.org. Those will be kept confidential until the disclosure or pre-disclosure is possible. And normally the security team, which are currently 9 members of the Xen community, will handle those issues. So another important topic is, what are Xen security issues? Well, quite obviously, any privileged escalation of a guest is a security issue. So when an unprivileged guest suddenly gains control over other guests or over the whole host, this is a security issue. Causing any denial of service of other guests or the whole hosts from unprivileged guests. The possibility to read or even write data of the host outside, which is outside of the normal guest control, or to spy on other guests' memory by passing normal access control mechanisms. So of course, if a guest has been granted a page of another guest, it can access this page, but it shouldn't be able to access any random page of other guests. And as a last point, if some bug or weakness in the Xen code allows a guest unprivileged process to attack other processes in the same guest or the kernel of that guest, which shouldn't be allowed normally, this is another Xen bug or Xen security issue. I have to mention it, what are not Xen security issues. So any attack of a DOM0 root process against the guest can't be a security issue, because that's the design of DOM0, that root process can basically access anything on the host, basically anything on the host. I am not talking about specific XSM configurations where DOM0 has not all privileges. Those are special considerations. So the normal XSM configuration has an almighty DOM0. So DOM0 being capable to bring down the host is quite of normal. The same is, of course, true for DOM0 kernel attacks against other guests. And what is not a Xen security issue is any of the Xen tools running it on zero can cause crashes or malfunctions of the whole host. Those might be simply bugs, but no security issues. If there are if there are driver domains in the configuration, any denial of service attacks of the driver domains against specific non-hardened guest front-end drivers are not considered security issues. Which guest frontends are considered to be hardened is stated in the security statement of support.md. Of course, it's also not a security issue if any bug or feature or configuration not being security supported will cause any issues because, yeah, well, they are not security supported. And last but not least, quite some security issues are being reported to the security team, which are just related to, let's say, a writable wiki, which is, well, yes, the purpose of a wiki, but nevertheless, we get some reports of those. So any website issues might be interesting for the Linux Foundation, but not for the Xen security team. So now some statistics, what has happened since the last Xen Summit, so since June 2021. We have 36 XSAs being made public in this timeframe, which got assigned 60 CVEs. So there are more CVEs than XSAs because some XSAs might contain more than one CVE. The security team published 395 patches regarding to those 36 XSAs. This is including backwards to older Xen versions. And the patch files, just doing a line count of the patches, summed up to over 64,000 lines. It should be noted that 10 of those 36 XSAs have been discovered by community members not being members of the security team. So why is it that obviously 26 of the XSAs are not falling into this class? So one answer is, of course, the line just below. 4 XSAs have been related to hardware problems, which have been quite covered quite intensively by the press. So basically, Intel AMD processor, I'm not sure if there's any ARM related. I'm not sure, might be. But there's still, of course, 22 XSAs missing. Those were all discovered by security team members, mostly when working on another XSA, we discovered other vulnerabilities because we were looking closely at the code, which was related to the vulnerability. 7 of the XSAs were related to Xen-specific Linux kernel code. So we are covering not only the Xen hypervisor, but Xen-related code in other products might be covered as well. For example, the Linux kernel, QEMU might be another case. For FreeBSD, NetBSD, or the PD Windows drivers, those are basically covered, but mostly the security support is in those projects. But we will negotiate with the product owners of those components how the XSA should be handled, when we can disclose the vulnerability, and whether they want to do anything or not. And one XSA was related to just a clarification of this support statement. So we decided to explicitly call out the hardened front ends of the Linux kernel and the non-hardened ones as well, to make clear which ones would qualify for an XSA and which ones wouldn't. This last XSA, of course, got no CVE because it wasn't reporting a vulnerability, but just clarifying what would be a vulnerability. Okay, the different topics, the hardware XSAs, basically the most famous ones. They seem to come in on a quite regular basis, so I can't say if it will ever end. Basically, yeah, it's a constant struggle between performance and security, as most of you will know. And yeah, sacrificing performance for security is something not seen by all parties the same way. So, of course, the processor vendors want to have as good performance as possible, and they will always just make the performance numbers of an unmitigated system public and not telling you much about what the performance will look like with all the security mitigations in place. And those problems can then be handled by the different products, Xen being one of them. Unfortunately, those problems are quite complex to solve, and they are consuming very much time of the security team. Thankfully, Andrew Cooper is taking most of that load, but nevertheless, there are quite some intense reviews, discussions, and so on needed. And this is not aided by the fact that the processor vendors, I don't think I need to name the most important one here, are not very fancy to allow pre-disclosure. So we can really only discuss it within the security team, and in theory, we can't even discuss it with all members of the security team. And basically, they're weakening this a little bit so we can discuss it internally. But this pre-disclosure disallowance results in basically 0 days for downstream consumers of Xen, which are not partner of the hardware partner program. On the plus side, we have to say that there are very good communication channels across the different software projects and hardware vendors as well. So while we are not allowed to discuss maybe Intel problems directly with ARM, Intel will, for example, say, hey, ARM, we have a specific problem in this area. You should look whether you don't have any problems in the same area, when Intel is believing this could hit other processor vendors as well. And especially with the Linux kernel maintainers in the security team, we have very good communication channels. So we are negotiating and discussing the issues and can come to similar solutions or discuss if another approach would be better. So this is working quite fine. Then we had the already told Linux-related XSAs, which started this year basically with XSA 376, clarifying the security statement. So which PD device front ends are regarded to be vulnerable against their backends or not. The idea being that we want to support driver domains which might be potential malicious. So, of course, we don't support the maliciousness, but we want to support potentially malicious driver domains without sacrificing the guests. Of course, such a backend can still clobber the I/O data, for example, but it shouldn't be able to access random guest memory or stuff like that. So if you use encrypted disks, the front end should be able to discover if the data has been dealt with in an illegal way by decompressing it or deciphering it. And this should be fine then. Before making this XSA public, we sent out some patches to the Linux kernel, hardening at least the most important front ends, being the disk, the network, and the console ones. Xen front end, of course, is considered to be so Xen is considered to be not malicious because it's the core Xen component. After that hardening of the front ends for further XSAs related to those front ends came up, they were dealt with, and we had additional 2 XSAs for the Xen netback driver, which where the front end could cause denial of service, for example. In the Xen hypervisor, the majority of the related XSAs have been in the architecture-specific code. We had 3 XSAs in ARM-specific code and 15 in the x86-specific code. Quite natural, x86 is more vulnerable because it has a much wider interface to guests. For one being the PD interface for PD guests, which ARM doesn't have. And of course, most of the code is quite older than the ARM one, so we have still some backlog, obviously, regarding security. So of the 15 x86 XSAs, 4 were PD guest related, and 5 were IO-MMU related. And 5 were related to ground table code, where you see, for example, there was, I think, 1 XSA discovered in the ground table code, and during working on that, some further ones popped up. Last but not least, some issue classifications. So we had 5 XSAs where PV backends could attack frontends. We had 2 XSAs where frontends could attack backends. That were the Xen netback ones. Of course, the 4 hardware-related XSAs where the guests could spy on data due to hardware issues. We had 15 XSAs related to the ability of guests causing denial of service of the whole host, which might be quite theoretical in some cases, but nevertheless. And quite some of those would be due to memory leaks, for example. So it would take some time before guests would succeed, but the issues are present or were present. In 9 cases, it couldn't be outruled that the guest could gain control of the whole host. And there were 2 further cases where guests could read data which they shouldn't be able to read. Yeah, that's basically all I have. Are there some questions? Jan?
Yes, one remark. I think it didn't really come through exactly the way you might want to be as to issues and tools there. The initial slides were largely focused on products and hypervisor, and while the later slides then largely excluded issues and tools there. Whereas there are certainly cases where tools components are actually security issues that we would
sure. So, okay, Jan said it doesn't come through quite clearly that there are indeed Xen tool state issues which might qualify as Xen security issues. So, notably, this would be, for example, QEMU site issues, where, for example, a guest could gain control over QEMU and somehow by I/O data or whatever, and then QEMU could gain control over the host. This is one example. So there is some way to deprivilege QEMU, and if QEMU is capable to cross this deprivilege area or boundary, then this, of course, would be a security issue, for example. I think this is what you're referring to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, all those in the past, we even have issues in the XL license.
Okay, yeah.
It's not excluded, but it's exceedingly less likely than having anything in the hardware.
Yeah, right. So XL might be vulnerable, but it's not very likely. And of course, other cases would be where Xen store is being compromised somehow by a guest or something like that. So this would be another case. Or the XL daemon controlling the domain reboot of a domain or stuff like that. So there are surely theoretical cases where this could happen, but they are not very likely. Xen store has seen some XSAs. So. Yeah, Marek?
On the slide with things that are not security issues, you mentioned denial of service of non-hardened frontends. What do you mean by this that precise statement? Does that mean that code execution of non-hardened frontends are considered? Will XSAS be issues for that?
Okay, Marek asked what?
I believe that was slide 4.
Yeah, probably. Okay. Yeah. That mentioning denial of service attacks of driver domains against non-hardened guest frontend drivers is not a security issues. The negative statement of that is that non-denial of service attacks against non-hardened guest frontends would be considered security issues. This is a little bit kind of on the edge. We are trying to harden all front ends, but it's a backend being able to modify any data not related to I/O data could lead to denial of service, but it could also lead to any other problems in the guest, which would be something we need to discuss and maybe need to clarify in the support statement, but it's hard to find a good formulation for that. So it would depend on the case, I think. So just reading any data, I'm not sure, because this would mean that we would need to visit all front-end code in this regard and doing bounce buffering probably when the backend is not trusted, and this is quite hard. On the other hand, modification of other data will most certainly lead in some way to denial of service. So, yeah. Yeah, this is the good case, basically. Yes, I agree. So the best way to handle it would be to harden all front ends, and then all questions are removed in this regard. But this is quite some work.
I have another question, I think. Do you consider the credit server list to be encrypted?
What the?
The credit server list to be encrypted.
So, okay, the question was of the pre-disclosure release could be sent in encrypted. Maybe, George, you can tell us about the progress here.
So there is, it's, okay, so the disclosure list at the moment is not, so the discussion list that we have between ourselves are not at the moment encrypted. And it's actually a very tricky problem to make happen. So we actually, back in February, started a process to try and experiment with the Linux kernel. Apparently has a thing called remail, which allows you to do kind of a security kind of encrypted list. But basically, a lot of the features that we rely on to actually work effectively, as far as the thing, don't quite work right? So in order to simplify things, the way that email works is you have to reply. So like it sends out, so you send it to the list with the list key, and the list has the private key like on a secure VM somewhere, and it has the public keys of all the members of the list, and then it sends that, it re-encrypts it and sends it out to all the members of the list. But when it comes from somebody, from the list, but because it has to change the message, so it can't be from the original sender. It has to be from the mailing list itself. And so the mailing list, it will encode it. So all the messages to the list come from the mailing list. But you know how like you know how there's two parts of the email. There's like the quote part of the email, and then there's the actual email address. So the actual email address is always security @, but the quote part contains the name and the email of the original sender, which just like confuses all the mailer programs, and it's a huge thing. So we've been trying to work with our credit team, our IT supplier, to try and make it kind of more usable for us as a term. But basically, we ended up running up about 50 hours of this person's time, and that cost us basically the project about $11,000, and it's not quite finished yet. So I guess I think the short answer is we have it. I do feel embarrassed that we don't have an encrypted mailing list. The discussions and stuff are not encrypted. I think it would definitely be better if we had an encrypted mailing list. I think it's important to have, for the future. It's not a simple problem to make it it's actually usable for us as a community discussing with each other. So first of all, just being able to discuss with each other the process with the things, but also how to sort of CC. Often what we need to do is we need to bring someone else into the discussion, right? So like, oh, we don't know about this thing. Let's CC Paul Durant, or let's CC this other person, or maybe we need to ask the original submitter some more questions, right? So like, does it work in this circumstance? How does this work? And so on. Doing all those things in a workflow fashion isn't something that Remail does currently at the moment. And I think what we're going to have to do at some point, basically, is to hire basically get a contractor to. I have an idea for how we could make it work in a way that it would actually work with the workflow. But I think we basically need to hire a contractor to modify it to do what we need to do. Yeah. So does that answer your question? Okay. So we are working on it, and I think it would be much better if we had an encrypted list. But it's actually quite a difficult problem to do, particularly with a lot of the things about you can't modify mail in transit is anti-spam prevention. Spam prevention, right? Anti-spam measures. But that really restricts what you can do as far as how you modify mails in transit as a result. So. We haven't. One thing is because that would mean basically we would have to have the email would have to. So like we can't have other people reporting it via Matrix, I don't think. So that would be someone else would send us an encrypted mail that would have to sort of go somehow somewhere else, and then we would have to kind of internally discuss it via Matrix. But then you have the same problem as far as like, how do we? Okay, now we need to add. We need to bring in an outside expert, so we need to ask. Someone from the FreeBSD community. How, like, if we make this change, how it will affect you or OpenBSD or NetBSD or something like that. How will it affect KubesOS or asking the original reporter more questions about how this is going to work. It's like it makes it it makes it easier for us to maybe talk to each other, but it doesn't solve the problem of like bringing in external people. And I think a lot of it's have an existing workflow where our emails are kind of the sort of our to-do list, right, and where we store all of our kind of information. So that would be a significant change in the way that we work.
Okay. Yeah.
26 XSAS from the security itself.
Yeah.
So were there mostly a reaction to some event, or are you chasing actively security issues?
Chasing actively is a little bit exaggerated, I would say. We stumble upon them. Of course, sometimes someone is asking, hey, I have a problem here. Could it be security related? And we pinpoint it then. So it might be that someone is discovering a problem, doesn't locate it completely, and ask the security team if this is something known or whether they should report it in the open. And sometimes this will then be identified by the security team to be an XSA. In some other cases, someone is reporting an issue on Xen basically, and we say, oops, yeah. And this can happen as well. But I think for active chasing and searching in the code, we have not enough clones of ourselves.
It happens occasionally that we intentionally look for it.
Yeah, okay, but this is
the exception.
Yeah, this is the exception, and mostly when looking through some code which is related to an XSA or where we discover an issue which could be a security issue, we tend to look for similar cases in neighbor code or similar code or in the same code, of course.
What about fuzzing or other?
Okay.
Is something
So Marek is asking whether we are using fuzzing techniques. So this would be outside of the security team. So such endeavors basically should be started in the community, in the open, to find security bugs, of course, but this shouldn't be something the security team is doing. So when fixing security bugs, of course, we try to limit ourselves to really fixing only the security bugs. For basically two reasons. One is to minimize our work, because backports need to be done as well, of course. And the other thing is any non-security fixes should be done in the open. So you will see rather often that just after an XSA has been made public and the patches has been posted or committed, that there's a pile of other patches in the related code area for cleanups or things like that. So that's quite natural. And in some very few cases, we have developed some features in the security team. For example, Xen Live Update was one of them, for making it easier to adopt the changes into working fleet. But in any case, those were workable, but have been posted then in the open before being committed to the repo.
I know Andrew is trying to write tests for at least some of XSAs. Is there?
Yeah, so regression testing tests are being written partially after the fact, partially, of course, during the development phase of the patches, for verify that the patches really fix the problem. And of course, we are trying to do some tests before making the patches public that they don't regress anything else, but often enough the computing power isn't enough or the timeline is too short or so. So it happens, unfortunately, one time or the other that some XSA patches are introducing other regressions. But of course, such regression tests, again, are normally to be created in the open via the open mailing lists.
Time, so thank you, Jürgen.
Okay.